Roosters, they're one of the most controversial parts of backyard chicken flocks. And I get so many questions from folks about roosters in terms of what to look for and what not to look for. I decided to make a list of 11 unconventional traits to look for in a rooster. And I'm gonna break each of those traits down for you. And let me just tell you right now that you're gonna find number 9 to be totally stupid. Pablo Barn Cat, how's it going, buddy?
How are you doing this morning, pal? Good to see you. Ooh, it's getting colder again. Some of this mud is finally starting to firm up. Hi, Ginny. How's my Ginny?
Oh, look at this happy dog. It's my buddy.
Hey, pal.
Hi. Hi, good to see you. You know, the other day I saw a YouTube short that somebody made that absolutely warmed my heart.
It's a Toby dog. It's a Toby. That's the dog. That's my child. Hey.
Oh, and hi, Lady Abington. Good to see you too. Hi, Toby. You both are full of beans this morning. Oh, it's good to see both of you. Hi.
It's hard not to have a great day when you started with large weight farm dogs. Isn't that right, Toby?
Yeah. You know, sometimes I get questions about roosters. Yeah, you heard me right. I said roosters. And one question in particular that I recently got is somebody asked me what's the difference between a chicken and a rooster, which I know for some folks is going to be ridiculous, but I guess it's worth explaining. And that all roosters are chickens, but not all chickens are roosters, because the rooster is an adult male. You can hear one of my roosters right there. And then the hen is an adult female, but both hens and roosters are chickens. But another question that I've gotten about roosters is, like, what sort of characteristics actually make for a good rooster? Because I'm not necessarily looking for some of the same things that a lot of other folks are looking for. And speaking of roosters, let me introduce you to my weirdest rooster on the farm. His name is Mr. Frizzle. Hey, Mr. Frizzle, good morning, sir. How are you? Here's your feed. I still have some left over from yesterday. So this tiny little flock of 3 birds are my weird chickens, and they really bring up maybe the first thing you should consider if you're thinking about having roosters on your farm, is that you want to make sure you have a good ratio of hens to roosters. You know, if you actually have too many roosters, you can develop the problem of them overbreeding your hens, and then your girls are not going to look good. Like, to deal with the fact that I've had too many roosters in the past, I've even had to put special clothing on my chickens. And so the first trait you should be thinking about when it comes to your roosters is how many roosters should you have? You know, typically the rule of thumb is somewhere between 5 and a dozen hens for every single rooster that you have. This keeps your numbers from getting out of control. And I'll also say that there is this impact when you have multiple roosters with a flock that you need more hens than the roosters. So for example, in this tiny little flock that you're seeing here, I only have 2 hens right now with 1 rooster. And now typically you would say that that's way too much rooster for the number of girls, but because I only have 1 rooster, I'm not too worried about the ratio all that much. And so a good rule of thumb too, if you have like a backyard flock, you could have 3 hens and 1 rooster, or you could even have 6 hens and 1 rooster. You could even have, like I have, 2 hens and 1 rooster if the rooster isn't very aggressive. So even though 2 hens and 1 rooster works fine right now, if I had 2 roosters and 4 hens, that would be too many roosters because the ratio would be so out of whack because of the multiple roosters. And so the number of roosters is number 1. The second thing I like to think about is the breed. Now, for those of you guys not closely acquainted with my friend Mr. Frizzle here, Mr. Frizzle is a breed of chicken known as a silkie. That's why his feathers actually look like hair. They're actually a breed characteristic. Silkie chickens tend to have these weird feathers. They'll often have feathers on their feet. They're usually much smaller than conventional chickens. They're not nearly good at foraging. They're not nearly good at egg production. They're not nearly good at meat production. They're much more fragile. So you might be hearing all of these characteristics and saying, why would anybody ever want a silkie chicken? But you raise silkie chickens because you like to have weird and or fancy chickens, which is what I'm hoping that my friend Mr. Frizzle hatches out here for me. But that decision of what type of rooster to have is driven by what type of breed of chicken do I want. And within my weird chicken flock, I want weird chickens. All right, you can go back to your girls, pal. Good morning, birds. How's everybody doing this morning, huh? Abby, we're on good behavior, remember that. Look at all these birds. How's everybody doing this morning? How's my barred rock? Here's my flock's main rooster. His name is Black Francis. You know, like the pixies. He's actually a black Australorp rooster. He's a good big bird. The black Australorps in general are very solid egg producers, but then they're also very good for cold climates, as well as very hardy and good foragers and good for being out on pasture. So yeah, so this is Black Francis right here. As you can see, he's actually a pretty good size, hefty rooster. I'm gonna guess he weighs 11 pounds, 12 pounds, something like that. He's gotten to be a very big boy. But as you can see, he's also not all that crazy or aggressive, which is another characteristic I look for. Like, I have had roosters in the past who are just complete jerks. And they will attack you and just be a total pain in the butt. And my experience is an aggressive rooster comes from two things. One is nature and one is nurture. When it comes to nature, there are certain breeds that are just way more aggressive. So for example, the first chickens I ever hatched out on the farm were Americana chickens. And I got a mixture of 2 hens and 4 roosters that hatched. 3 of those rooster chicks I dispatched very quickly, and you know, by the time that they were, you know, full size, they went into the freezer. But I tried to keep the 4th rooster as a breeding partner for the future. All right, buddy, you are officially the grand champion rooster. You're the one who gets to stick around on the farm and propagate future generations of chickens here. The only problem was he was just an absolute jerk. He was constantly attacking Allison, he was constantly attacking me, and he was beating up the hens so bad. In fact, it was actually a situation where I had 1 rooster and 2 hens, and one of those hens got injured so much, she ended up dying from a few of those injuries. So I decided to dispatch Lucky the rooster before the winter was even over. And so much of the reason why I sent him packing was rooted in the fact that he was just so gosh darn aggressive. And so you need to think about that aggression factor as one of the breed characteristics when you're thinking about your rooster choices. But Black Francis here, he's actually pretty good. You know, one of the signs you should look for with a rooster when they're like a lion's mane or their mane kind of flares up, it's usually when they're going to be the most aggressive. So you should always take that as a warning sign. And now please, I am no expert and I'm always just a guy sharing with you some of the things I've experienced here. But one of the things that I have found when it comes to the nurture part of working with roosters is the more you handle them, the less aggressive they tend to be. Now, please keep in mind, that is a rule of thumb. That is not something that's guaranteed. But one of the things that I've often done with all of my roosters is pretty much just pick them up and carry them around, much like I'm doing with my buddy Black Francis here. Some folks are gonna say that it's your way of showing the rooster that you're the dominant one, and I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I've definitely found that my roosters are much less aggressive when I take the time to carry them and handle them. Now, another thing about roosters that I wanna point out is that you can see on the bottom of my buddy Black Francis's foot, he's got this thing, like this little spike at the bottom. That's what's known as the rooster spur. That spur is often used by them in a number of different ways. They use it as part of the way the roosters fight with each other, and when they're courting the girls and trying to establish their pecking order, oftentimes that spur will come out as an attack mechanism. They also kind of use it to keep their ladies in place when they're breeding with them. I imagine that that sharp pokiness plays some sort of function there, even though I don't know exactly what that might be. Another thing though I've noticed is with a lot of my bad roosters, their spurs are often very sharp, but when it comes to like my pal Black Francis here, his are very like dull and they're not that sharp at all. I think that's good for both my females as well as for me, because like he's just not as dangerous. Now I'm not exactly sure what dulls the spur, but one theory I have is because my birds live a mostly outdoor life and can range around and do a lot of stuff, that's part of what keeps their spur ground down and like not from getting out of control, almost like I don't know, like the nails on your dog or something. I'm actually not sure if that's true or not, but if anybody's watching this video and can confirm or deny that in the comments, I'd love to hear about it. Okay, Black Francis, back to your flock. So please allow me to now introduce to you Barry White. Barry White is about a year younger than Black Francis, but he's actually almost about the same size and weight. That's because his breed of chicken is what's known as the American breast chicken. The American breast chicken is actually a meat bird chicken. So typically where like the black Australorp or the Rhode Island Red or the Barred Rock or the Leghorn, those are all egg-laying breeds or dual-purpose breeds. The American breast isn't necessarily known for laying a lot of eggs, but it is known for having birds that are bigger than normal and that grow faster than normal. And don't tell my buddy Barry White this, but they produce a very tasty carcass. So last year as an experiment, I decided to get a handful of American breast chickens and raise them out and see how I liked them. And I decided to actually keep 4 of them alive into this year, as well as harvest the rest of them. And the ones that I harvested were a little bit tiny because I was doing it a little bit early, but they made for outstanding like roasted chicken. And so it's a really good bird breed to go for that. And so thinking about like, say, the quality of the meat is another characteristic you might think about. And I know I'm horrifying my friend here by talking about this. Actually, my plan this year is to hatch out a bunch of American breast chicks and raise those up. And those will become future breeders as well as future eaters here on the farm. You know, I've done experiments before in the past where I've actually tried to raise up like egg-laying birds and take all of those roosters and harvest them for meat. And what I found is the feed conversion isn't nearly as good as if you have a good meat breed. And so that's why I'm undertaking this one. And that is another breed characteristic. And another interesting thing to look at, and again, this is where the spur is an interesting characteristic for thinking about your chickens, or your roosters, I should say. Berry White barely has a spur at all. And so I don't know if that's like a breed trait. I should probably look it up.
I Googled the heck out of that one and I couldn't find any information one way or the other.
But again, I see that spur as an important consideration to make. You know, so often people will talk about removing spurs, and I get a little nervous about doing that because number one, I always think that like when an animal's born with something, generally as a rule of thumb, I like to let them keep it. So like, for example, I don't disbud the horns on my cattle. I also would like to try to avoid having to like remove the spurs of my chickens. And so that's what it comes down to. Hey girl. Look at this barred rock. She is like the friendliest barred rock chicken in the world, which is maybe another characteristic to think about when you're thinking about breeds and breed types. All right, buddy, you can go free. He's not the most graceful bird in the world. All right, let's let these birds out. Release the Quacken! Come on, birds. Oof. Yeah, what was really muddy is now firmed up. Once all that water starts to splash and slosh around, it's gonna get really slippery down here. I know, I gotta feed you guys. Hang on a second. There you go, birds. You can see Black Francis is rounding up his girls and trying to tell them that there's food. You know, that's actually another characteristic I like to look for in my roosters. Leadership skills. And I know that's gonna probably sound ridiculous to you guys. So your rooster is generally gonna be the boss of your flock. It's not to say that your hens don't have a pecking order of their own, but the rooster is the one who's gonna like tell the birds when and where to eat. He's gonna even share his food. There's actually a behavior known as tidbitting, where a rooster will give some of his food to the hens as a way to like court them and support them. Then oftentimes at night, like when my birds are outdoors in the summer months, typically what you're gonna see is my most dominant rooster is gonna sit outside and wait and watch to see when the girls are coming in. So for example, last summer, my lead rooster was Black Francis, and he'd always wait outside waiting for all of the other hens to go inside. I'd have the Moron brothers, who were two Bielenfelder roosters, who are the junior roosters. They wouldn't actually be as bossy as much, but Black Francis, he is the flock boss, and he still is the flock boss. Now the other thing, and maybe most important thing that the rooster's doing though, is they're watching for threats. So you can see actually both Berry White and Black Francis sort of watching over their girls, watching out actually for me because I grabbed them earlier, and so they're now probably a little bit annoyed and mad at me, thinking I'm a somewhat threat. I'm not too worried though, they'll get used to me again in about 60 minutes. But that behavior is kind of what you want to look for in a good rooster, one that's going to look out for their ladies and really try to take care of them. You know, particularly when it comes to aerial threats like hawks, it's usually the rooster who's going to sound that first alarm and get all of the other ladies under cover and protected from the hawks. And so yes, that's actually why I'm always looking for leadership in my flock. Thanks for the pumpkin, Pat. Now, one thing to consider if you're thinking about owning roosters is the crowing, because roosters do crow. They will start crowing usually just before sunrise, and they will crow throughout the course of the day. They quiet up at night, but then, I don't know, depending on when the sun's rising, a couple hours before sunrise, they usually start up again and you'll start to hear it. And so if you live in like a rural area like we do, and you're an early riser like I am, it really doesn't matter and make any difference. But if you live in like a tight suburban yard and you have a lot of neighbors, you might need to think about both how many roosters and even if you have roosters based on that consideration. You know, the irony about bird noise is it's the female ducks that are really loud and the male ducks are really quiet. And I wouldn't say that the hens are quiet, but they are much more quiet than the roosters. And so honestly, if you're looking to have a mixed flock in a suburban area and you're worried about noise, having one drake and like 5 hens is not a bad way to go. Of course, fair warning, I have seen my roosters try to breed with the hens before, and I've heard of other folks having to deal with drakes trying to breed chickens. In fact, you'll notice Bean the duck right there. Black Francis has a wee bit of a crush on her. So I think that's gonna take some time. Oh no, look, Black Francis is trying to mate with Bean. Sorry, Bean, I know you got a little bit of a shock there. Black Francis just tried to do you dirty. You know, egg characteristics are another consideration to have for your birds, like both how frequently do they lay the eggs and what sort of eggs do they lay. So for example, let's check on our situation for eggs this morning. Oh, looks like I got a couple. So I've got 3 eggs here. 2 of those eggs actually look very similar. One of them is a different shade of brown. And obviously it's not the rooster laying the eggs, it's the hen laying the eggs. Some of those genetics from the chicken breed do get passed from the rooster to the chicks, And so particularly if you're trying to think about making interesting colored eggs or just thinking about how many eggs your birds are gonna lay, thinking about that breed characteristic is an important part of selecting your rooster as well. And now for the final characteristic that I like to look for in a rooster, I'd like to introduce you to my pal Dorian Gray. Dorian Gray is a blue Cochin rooster who came to the farm last summer. I didn't pick him out, I didn't choose him, but when I bought some chicks from my hatchery Murray McMurray, they will usually throw in a free chick, like just as a bonus. And 90% of the time, that free chick that you're gonna get is gonna be a rooster. That's because the truth of the matter is, when it comes to egg-laying breeds of birds, there isn't a lot of demand for roosters. And so you're gonna have situations where you can get a bird for free. And Dorian Gray here is a perfect example of that. He's actually a very pretty bird, and I like his genetics. I have 3 blue Cochin hens in my flock as well. I also have a black Cochin in the form of Carmen. And so I have just a number of Cochins in the mix. I like Cochins because they're very cold, hardy birds. They've got these great fluffy feet, and the hens tend to make it for very good mothers of chicks. He's very chill, he's got good temperament, but he is not the lead rooster. Like the rooster pecking order here in the main flock is, you know, Black Francis is number 1, Barry White is number 2, and Dorian Gray is number 3. I decided to keep him around to add some variety into my hatching mix, but the reality is, one characteristic I look for in a rooster is it free? Because a number of the roosters that I've gotten over the years I've never actually purchased. They were just roosters that happened to show up. Either somebody was giving away a rooster or I got a free chick. And so for folks out there who are looking for roosters, the availability of roosters and the price of those roosters is often a key consideration in my eyes. I know that that is kind of unconventional. And it really comes down to rooster economics. You see, there's so much demand for egg-laying hens, but the ratio of roosters to hens in a flock needs to be, like I said, you know, at least usually 5 or 6 to 1. The consideration you're gonna have to make is, so often people are looking to either rehome or send roosters into the freezer. And so if you can give a rooster a good home, I think it's a great idea. And the other thing, just for newbie chicken keepers, to let you guys know too, you know, there isn't a ton of demand for roosters out there. And so if you're somebody who has a flock of chickens and you have like 5 hens and 5 roosters and you're hoping somebody's gonna take, you know, 4 of your roosters and give them a good home, you've got to realize that that's a pretty big ask of somebody. Hang on, buddy. Back. 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 I gotta clean their water troughs. I usually do a cleaning once a week. Like, I top off their water and give them fresh water every day. But once a week, I like to get in there with the brush, scrub things down, and then pour everything fresh. Because it's always good to cycle out fresh things for your animals. And that cycling of fresh things also goes for your roosters as well. You know, the thing about roosters here on our farm is they don't stay on the farm for too long. Easy, boys. I know you're excited about the fresh water. I know, this is always your favorite time when you can knock over the water tub. There you go. There you go. Joey, you're the funniest of them. I mean, Randy, here, you can have some too. Oh, that's good, isn't it? Yeah, you like that. So it's important to note that roosters on our farm don't last very long. Like, the longest they'll stick around is like maybe 2 years. Because typically what I'll do is I'll bring in fresh roosters that are not from any of my birds, and I'll raise those roosters up, and usually they become the main rooster for my flock, or roosters for my flock, for a couple of years. But after they've hatched out some chicks of their own, that's usually when I do my fall bird cull. I'll put those roosters in with the other birds that I'm culling, and then they end up in the freezer as like basically a stewing bird. And so particularly if you're hatching birds on your flock, it's important to remember that with roosters, you don't want to keep them on there forever. And while there's lots of folks who will say that when it comes to breeding birds, inbreeding isn't that big of an issue, and it's true in a lot of cases it doesn't present significant problems, I generally try to avoid it because it's an easy enough situation to fix. And I actually find that with my chickens, it's always good to have those fresh genetics, and so I err on the side of caution there. So for example, Black Francis and Barry White are gonna stick around for this year. I'm gonna hatch out a lot of babies from them, and then come this fall, they will no longer be on the farm, or at least outside the farm. They'll probably be in the farm freezer. All right, I got some treats for some good dogs. Good boy. There you go. Abido, you're being so good. Both being so good. There you go. Good girl. Abby, you are learning patience, and this is what we're trying to teach you here. This is good. Good girl. Toby, you're being a good tutor. Or at least demonstration. Here, you can have the crumbs. All gone. All gone.